So we looked at a few points on building a resilient tomorrow in the previous podcast, and I'm going to add some points here from the Working Group 3 report under IPCC AR6 Assessment Report 6 on climate resilient development. Obviously both are related, but separate points are made by the two reports. So let's just kind of take a very brief look at this. Actions and strategies consider both climate compatible development and climate action. So we're talking about adaptation being consistent with economic development, national adaptation plans also being consistent with priorities for economic development, health adaptation plan being synergistic with national adaptation plan, and of course we have to have climate resilient development being a goal overall for a country's adaptation and resilience for the future. So that's resilient future, building a resilient tomorrow. So the Venn diagram here looks at climate compatible development and climate action, and you want to think about development strategies, adaptation strategies, and mitigation strategies. And obviously development and mitigation overlap on the low carbon development, so that you're increasing your renewables and reducing your carbon footprint, energy intensity of the GDP, and carbon intensity of the energy, and so on. And adaptation is of course necessary for risks that are already present, as well as building resilience for risks coming tomorrow, managing the unavoidable in that sense. So mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies together have co-benefits for climate action, which also has to be consistent with the nationally determined contribution. And here, in terms of development and adaptation strategies, you want to narrow the adaptation gap so that your national adaptation plan actually understands the gaps that need to be closed. Together you have an intersection which gives you climate resilient development. Okay, that sounds nice. Can we add something more to it? So this is a conceptual figure illustrating the link between sustainable development and the adaptation gap. Sustainable development and sustainable development goals are always considered to see if adaptation and mitigation efforts are going independently of each other and not really tracking their impact, positive or negative, on the sustainable development goals, which cover everything from access to clean water, sanitation, education, women's health, children's health, and so on. So here we have sustainable development and the adaptation gap. So obviously everything happens in the development context, especially for the global south, low and middle income countries, current communities and countries at different levels of development. Sustainable development and adaptation gaps should look at emission pathways, sustainable development, risk, and then the future worlds we want to plan for, or we're going to end up with if we don't close the emissions reduction requirements and adaptation gaps. Okay. So the emission pathways go from low on this end to high. So we have 1.5 degrees C, 2 degrees C, and 4 degrees C warming pathways. Obviously there are people add 3 degrees C in the middle as well, as we saw in the first podcast here. So you have these pathways having multiple reaches to the future worlds. If you stay on the 1.5 degree pathway, we are more likely to be on the sustainable path with low poverty and low inequality in terms of sustainable development. This is the SSP 2.6 pathway, and as we said several times before, the technological promises on which we rely for achieving this pathway obviously have to be considered carefully, because there is a lot of dependence on carbon capture, bioenergy, and so on, which are not guaranteed to pan out. Okay. In terms of risks, it will give us low intensity and frequency of impacts, and we'll end up with climate resilient development as a future world. If we go up a little by allowing more emissions to 2 degrees C, it's the middle of the road SSP 4.5, I think. You can go and look it up, or maybe 2.6 to 4.5. That gives you middle of the road, and you have here potentially some adaptation gap which can increase inequality and enhance reliance on fossil fuel development, creating the adaptation gap to stay on this path. So you may end up going towards unequal distribution of loss and damage and or climate resilient development, depending on what you do with the risks here before going to the future world. And of course you have other pathways, 4° C with fossil fueled development or regional rivalry, the worst case scenario here. So you're going to end up with high poverty, high inequality and massive adaptation gaps, and you're going to have high intensity and frequency of impacts in terms of climate risks. So you will have only the options of universal loss and damage or unequal distribution of loss and damage. So if you look at what's already happening in terms of countries like Pakistan facing floods that basically drown the entire country, which are related to extreme events created by, let's say, warming of the Arabian Sea, which itself is related to warming over the Middle East, which itself really is related to greenhouse gas accumulations, carbon accumulation since the Industrial Revolution, which is largely due to the rich countries and the industrial activities and so on. So how do we deal with loss and damage in that sense? Who pays for it? Right now COP28 has started in Egypt, I think 2023 October, and already news reports say that the discussion on loss and damage has failed. So there we go. Okay, another schematic: climate resilient development pathways are development trajectory that successfully integrate greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation efforts to support sustainable development for all. So equitable, climate just developments and mitigation and adaptation are a noble goal, but how to ensure this at global scale is anything but obvious. So let's look at the rapidly narrowing window of opportunity to enable climate resilient development. So these are kind of optimistic views from IPCC, from IEA and so on, which say that we still have a narrow possibility of hitting the 1.5° C global warming target by 2100 with 67% probability, but we still have to rely on all sorts of technological promises for achieving these. But in this context of sustainable development and climate resilient development, let's look at the dimensions that result in actions towards lower climate resilient development versus dimensions that enable actions toward higher climate resilient development. So we have here arenas of engagement: community, social, socio-cultural, political, ecological, knowledge plus technology, economic plus financial, and there are gearboxes which can take you this way or that way. So in the actions enabling higher climate resilient development, you have ecosystem stewardship feeding into equity and justice, which results in inclusion and provides engagement and knowledge diversity as well. Whereas if you go towards arenas of engagement in the actions that lead to lower climate resilient development, then you have ecosystem degradation, singular knowledge, so you don't have knowledge diversity, so elite and dictators and non-democratic systems may dominate the societies. Inequity and justice will result, leading to exclusion and again feedback to ecosystem degradation. So this is a loop that's going to lead you to a world that's going to be here in terms of vulnerable, high poverty, ecosystem degradation, equity and inequality and injustice, high global warming levels and high risks with maladaptation, unsustainable development action, entrenched systems and rising emissions. So there are pathways that are shown in the middle. Here are where we are. IPCC AR6 was released in 2021 and 2022, delayed a bit by COVID. Where we want to be by 2030 in terms of sustainable development goals, and where we may end up for 2100 and beyond. So coming in to 2022 with past conditions on emissions, climate change and development, We have opportunities missed for higher climate resilient development, which we may still recover with actions and outcomes characterized by development pathways. Here, bringing us to this benign world in terms of climate resilient development, being lower here where we read before by 2100 and beyond, and higher here which will give us well-being, low poverty, ecosystem health, equity and justice, low global warming levels and low risk with adaptation, mitigation, transformation, systems transition and sustainable development goals all being met. So how do we get there? You have various pathways, so we can still stay on 1.5 degrees C pathways. So let's say we are going from 2022 being the present down this path where we don't want to go. So we are going to sacrifice sustainable development goals here by 2030 if we don't stay here. So you can see that we're going to meet most of them here, but we're going to miss most of them here. We're going to achieve most of them here, and we're going to miss most of them here. So increasing warming, path dependence and adaptation limits undermine sustainable development on these various schematics with shocks along the way. And you can see that you may have shocks and recoveries or no recoveries, whereas here warming limited to below 1.5 degrees C, adaptation enables sustainable development so that we come back to a sane future, which is something we must give the future generations instead of scaring the hell out of them about climate change impacts and that their future may be complete annihilation of the planet and so on. Okay, coming closer, transformative actions and system transitions characterize climate resilient development pathways. So here we have transformative actions and system transitions, societal choices that generate fragmented climate action or inaction, and unsustainable development perpetuate business as usual development. So characterized by unsustainable actions, fragmented climate actions and inaction feeding to each other and basically ending up with business as usual, everything getting degraded, land, water ecosystem, energy systems, urban and infrastructural systems, industrial system transition and so on. So societal choices that generate fragmented climate action or inaction and unsustainable development perpetuate business as usual and entrenched systems. Do we have the wherewithal to really transition out of the current situation where we are negotiating for more than 25 years and still seeing emissions going up and up and unclear as to when we will hit peak emissions and start coming down? Okay, in B we have societal choices that support climate resilient development that involve transformative actions that drive 5 system transitions. So here you have societal transitions in energy system transition, urban and infrastructural system transition, industrial system transition, land, water and ecosystem transition, and of course transformative climate actions. So you have sustainable climate actions, transformative climate actions and transformative societal actions as well. So just to read it off, societal choices that support climate resilient development involve transformative adaptation, mitigation and sustainable development actions that drive 5 systems transitions: energy, land and other ecosystems, urban and infrastructure, industrial and societal. There is close interdependence between these systems, of course. The system transition framework allows for a comprehensive assessment of the synergies and trade-offs between mitigation, adaptation and sustainable development. For example, land and water use in one system impacts the other systems and their surrounding ecosystems, thus reflecting how agricultural practices can have an impact on energy usage in urban centers. Finally, societal system transitions within each of the other systems enable transitions to occur. We should remember, of course, that decarbonization is going to be critical because this paradigm of reducing emissions hasn't led to any reduction in emissions as of yet. So there is the idea that we are in a carbon trap and the entire system is based on carbon, and unless we decarbonize, then we are not going to get to a new paradigm of innovating for decarbonizing the entire transitions of all the systems, not just thinking of emissions reductions. Okay, finally, multiple intertwined climate resilient development pathways. Multiple intertwined climate resilient pathways. Climate change adaptation is one of several climatic and non-climatic measures carried out through decision making by multi-actors that may drive a pathway in a CRD or non-CRD direction. Adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development actions can push a society in a CRD direction, but only if these measures are just and equitable. Is it possible that we decarbonize the system and everything just follows naturally, that sustainability, adaptation, mitigation, equity, justice, and climate resilient development all occur naturally? Okay, that's the idea I believe in. There are multiple simultaneous pathways on the past, present, and future. In the past, present, and future, societies illustrated as boats in here move on different pathways towards CRD and non-CRD, with some pathways more dominant than others, so more likelihoods of those being taken intentionally or unintentionally. The direction of pathways in is emergent, which means we cannot really say right now that they may just happen intentionally or unintentionally, as I said. Taking place through contestations and social choices, and choices, though social transformation as well as through surprises and shocks, illustrated as rocks here in the barriers in the pathways. Path dependency means it is possible but often turbulent to select from a non-CRD to a CRD, steer from a non-CRD to CRD pathway. Such a shift becomes more difficult as risks and shocks increase, so more rocks and a non-CRD process and outcomes progress, limiting future options. Okay, so just lots of words, but let's just look at the schematic here. Going from past into the future in terms of increasingly climate resilient pathways. So you have many pathways not taken and some pathways that are taken through contestation and societal deliberations. So you have things like COVID-19 happening along the way, with many other shocks like the Ukrainian Russian invasion of Ukraine, or the Hamas-Israel conflict, and other sorts of geopolitical, geoeconomic conflicts. Of course, you have acute and chronic shocks from acute shocks and climate stressors, chronic stressors from climate, with impacts like species extinctions, famines, droughts, floods, ecosystem shifts, and heat waves along the way. So you have fossil fuel based consumption and environmental degradation taking us down this path, with emissions and pollution, with exploitation of resources, irreversible conversion of natural resources into junk, social injustice and inequity, individualism, exclusion, nature-society disconnect, disempowerment, marginalization and discrimination, and resulting in dangerous climate irresponsible consumption in an unequal world. God forbid we go here, pathways not taken, we could end up with energy system transition, well-being based development, quality education, and you have land and ecosystem transitions, diversity, solidarity, indigenous knowledge, inclusion, gender equality, social justice and equity, empowerment, human and planetary health, leading us to a future that is safe in terms of climate, dignified living standards for all. Well, let's work towards that. Okay, so it's rather schematic and thematic and maybe optimistic, but the question is, how will human behavioral changes, transformational adaptations, mitigations, and technological innovations for food, water, agriculture, health, transportation, buildings, etc., how will they come together to give us this pathway that we really need and want for the future. I'll be gone long before that, but obviously we need to do as much as possible to give the future a hope in terms of rather than colonizing with maladaptations and fossil fueled developments for today. Okay, let me leave this here.